Hello. I just wanted to put into Google Classroom a little recording of the notes we did yesterday. I wasn't expecting to get that far, so that way you can look at them again if we want a little quickly for you to take notes. So we are doing the organizational levels of life doodle notes, the first page on the top of the second page, and we start at the bottom with the atom. So the example we gave was the carbon atom because the carbon with the designation letter C is the basis of all life. And we'll find that out when we do the biochemistry unit. But all atoms are made of subatomic particles. So that's the protons, neutrons, and electrons. And we also mentioned the six most common elements that make up living things. And besides carbon, it's hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are in the greatest percentage. I believe the four of those together make up about 90% of the atoms in living things, but phosphorus and sulfur are absolutely essential for proteins and DNA. Okay, going on to what atoms come together to make. They make large molecules, also called macromolecules. And I gave you the example of the four basic types of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. And of course, that is DNA pictured in the little bubble. And of course, they are made up of literally millions of atoms of these different types. Now, the virus is listed off to the side, and I had everybody put a big question mark in the bubble because one of the questions that always comes up, and here we've been studying the coronavirus for a couple of weeks, is are viruses living or not living? And the consensus of opinion is that they are non living. They do not perform all the functions of living things. And number one, they're not made of cells, and that's considered foremost in what a living thing is and does. Now, the example they give you here is a bacteriophage, which infects bacteria, and all viruses are made up of DNA or RNA, only one of the nucleic acids, and then proteins, a protein shell. The first level of living things, and again, all living things are made of cells, so we cover prokaryotic cells first, the simplest ones. The example there is a bacteria, and basically all prokaryotic cells are either what we think of as normal bacteria, or they are considered archaebacteria, like the things that live in hot springs and things like that. They are made up of lots and lots of macromolecules, and they are smaller than eukaryotic cells and simpler, of course. We'll find that out later. So when you go on to eukaryotic cells, you go into the level of organization called organelles. The example that's given here is the mitochondria, and everybody says powerhouse of the cell because that's how you remember it easily. And of course, they too are made up of lots and lots of macromolecules. And we're going to have lots of different kinds of organelles in these specialized eukaryotic cells. So to the right is a eukaryotic cell. The example that the person who did these doodle notes did was that, a human cell, you actually have 254 or more kinds of cells in your body, but they all have about the same basic parts. So a cell is made up of lots of organelles, including a membrane-bound nucleus. Bacteria have nuclear material, they have DNA, but it is not in a membrane-enclosed nucleus. And then all eukaryotic cells have specialized membranes as well. And when we talk about things being made up of cells, there's basically three levels of cellular organization, and I'd like you to write those here as well. You can have single-celled organisms with a eukaryotic cell, something like a yeast cell that we mentioned in our little sizing exercise. A paramecium or an amoeba is also a single-celled organism. And then on the opposite end, of course, are all the multicellular organisms, which is what most people are familiar with. They're familiar with animals and plants, and maybe fungi, most of which are multicellular. But then you have kind of an odd group of organisms. Sorry about the bell. You have an odd group of organisms called colonial organisms, and they are made up of many cells, but not in the layers of organization that we have here. And we'll talk about those as we come to them during our study. So if you go to the next page, when you have a lot of cells, they make up a tissue. The picture there is of stomach lining cells. They're packed tightly together. So examples of tissues would be epithelial tissue, respiratory tissue, nervous tissue, cardiac tissue, all the things we can think about in higher level organisms. They are made of groups of cells of the same type, and you have to add this part, that share a common function. Okay, an organ, and of course, everybody can name organs. We named off brain and heart, liver, stomach, things like that. But remember, a lot of different organisms have organs, like a leaf in a plant is an organ. So we have to think about other organisms as well. But any organ is made up of several types of tissue, and they have a specific function when they work together. Those go on to make up organ systems. And again, we could name off very easily in humans. I think we have normally it's divided up into about 12 organ systems, nervous system, digestive system, etc. But again, remember, plants have organ systems too, as do fish, insects, even protozoans have them. Okay, that's where we stopped, because from the whole organism on to the end of this little exercise is going to be what we take notes on Wednesday, because this is the beginning of the field of study that we call ecology.